I buried the love of my life. And months later, my son did something that left me speechless. Not angry. Not ashamed. Just frozen. I didn't know what to feel. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt something so real, but so wrong, you couldn't even name it out loud? Comment yes or no below. And if this hits you even a little, don't scroll, just like and subscribe. This story, it's not what you think. But it's true. And I lived every second of it. After Henry died, I kept the house the way it was. His shoes by the door. His shaving cream is still half used. His robe folded neatly on the chair, waiting. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything. It felt like if I did, he'd really be gone. He passed suddenly, heart failure. No warning, no long hospital stays. Just one night, we went to bed, and the next morning, I was alone. Everyone told me I was lucky it was quick. But there's nothing lucky about not getting to say goodbye. The days after the funeral blurred together. People brought food. Hugged me tight. Promised to check in. And then, they disappeared. That's what happens, I guess. Grief makes people uncomfortable. Especially when it lingers. But not Ian. My son stepped into that space without ever asking for a thank you. He started coming over more, then just stopped leaving. He cooked. Did the laundry. Kept the garden alive. He even started making my tea the way Henry used to, splash of honey, no sugar. It was like he could hear what I needed before I ever said it out loud. He never tried to fix me. Never told me to move on. He just stayed. And I leaned into that without realizing how much. I started waiting for him to get home. I found myself talking more at dinner, telling stories I hadn't told in years. Sometimes I'd catch myself laughing, and it scared me. Like I was betraying Henry by feeling anything other than broken. Ian didn't push. But he noticed. He'd say little things like, "It's okay to laugh, Mom," or "You're allowed to feel something good again." And I wanted to believe that. I did. But what no one tells you about grief is that it doesn't just make you sad. It makes you hungry, for warmth, for comfort, for closeness. And when that comfort comes from the one person who's still around. The one person who sees your pain without flinching. Things get blurry. I wasn't falling in love. But I was starting to need him in a way I couldn't explain. Not just as my son, but as my lifeline. And that? That was the beginning of everything I never saw coming. A few weeks after what would have been our 21st wedding anniversary, I came home to find the dining table set. I hadn't even realized Ian was home. There were candles, not the fancy ones, just the ones I usually kept in a drawer for when the power went out. But they were lit. And the house smelled like garlic and rosemary. Henry's favorite. For a second, I just stood in the hallway and stared, confused. And then Ian walked out of the kitchen holding 2 plates and this shy smile on his face. He didn't say anything elaborate. Just, "Sit down, Mom. I figured you hadn't eaten anything real today." And he was right. I hadn't. He'd cooked pasta, made a salad, even poured me a glass of red wine. I didn't ask why he went to all that trouble. I didn't have to. It was the date Henry and I always celebrated with a home-cooked meal. Ian remembered. Of course he did. I sat down, and we started eating. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like something I didn't know I was starving for. Company. Quiet. Comfort. We didn't talk about Henry. We talked about music. Ian had been listening to jazz lately, which caught me off guard because he always said it bored him. He told me he liked the sadness in it now. The honesty. And I knew exactly what he meant. At one point, I started to laugh about a story from when Ian was a toddler. How he used to hide my shoes in the freezer for some reason. But halfway through, my throat caught. It wasn't even about the shoes. It was just, all of it. The missing. The remembering. The weight of it pressing into my chest. I tried to smile through it, but the tears came anyway. Before I could wipe them, Ian reached across the table. He didn't say a word. He just leaned in and gently wiped the tear off my cheek with his thumb. It wasn't rough or rushed. It was tender. Too tender. I froze for a moment. And so did he. There was this beat, where neither of us moved. His hand was still on my face, and our eyes just locked. It wasn't a romantic moment. It wasn't that. But it also wasn't just mother and son. It was something. Something real. Something neither of us knew what to do with. He pulled his hand away first, clearing his throat and looking down at his plate. I smiled awkwardly and said something dumb like, "You always were the sweet one." And he gave this half laugh, the kind that sounded more like a sigh. We didn't talk about it. But something had shifted. Later that night, after I'd gone to bed, I found something on my pillow. It was Henry's old leather-bound journal. I hadn't seen it since the week after he died. I thought I'd packed it away in the attic. But Ian must have found it. Cleaned it. Brought it back. Inside, on a yellowed page, Henry had written, "If anything happens to me, tell Ian I'm proud of him. Tell Adley she saved me, just by loving me." I sat there, holding that page for what felt like hours. And I wondered, how do you let go of a man who said things like that? And how do you stop needing the one person still around who understands what it's like to lose him? I didn't sleep much that night. I just laid there, thinking about Henry, and about Ian. And about how love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. And sometimes, it lands in places you never expected. That night, it rained harder than it had in months. One of those long, moody storms that make the whole house feel smaller, quieter, like the walls are listening. I had just finished washing up when the power cut out. I was still drying my hands when everything went black. No hum from the fridge. No glow from the hallway light. Just rain, and the kind of stillness that makes you realize how much noise you've been using to distract yourself. Ian called out from the other room, just to check on me. I told him I was fine. A minute later, he came into the kitchen holding a small box of matches and a few candles. He lit them one by one and placed them around the living room, on the coffee table, by the window, near the edge of the old bookshelf Henry built. The light was soft and golden. Everything looked gentler somehow. I was sitting on the couch, and he joined me without a word. We didn't have the TV. No phones. No noise. Just us. And the dark. After a few minutes, he pulled Henry's journal from the side table. The one he had left on my pillow days earlier. He asked, "Do you want to read it together?" I hesitated. Then nodded. So we sat there, side by side, flipping through the worn pages, taking turns reading lines out loud. Some were funny, Henry's random thoughts on aging, his rants about politics. Others were heavier. There was one entry written the year Ian turned 15. Henry had written, "Adley never lets the world see when she's tired. But I see it. She holds this family up even when she's falling apart inside." When Ian read that, he paused. Then turned to me and said, "He was right, you know." I laughed a little, just to soften the air, and replied, "He was dramatic." But Ian didn't laugh back. He just looked at me, like he was trying to memorize the version of me that didn't realize how strong she was. "You've been carrying everything since he left," he said softly. "And you're still standing. I don't know how you do it." That's when it hit me. He wasn't saying it the way a son admires a mother. It was different. Deeper. Not inappropriate, but closer than it should have been. I felt my eyes sting. I don't know if it was the journal, or the quiet, or just the ache of being seen when you felt invisible for too long. But I leaned back. I didn't want to cry again. Not in front of him. He reached over, handed me a tissue, and I swear, his hand lingered against mine just a second too long. I told myself it didn't mean anything. It was just the moment. The storm. The memories. Eventually, I laid my head back on the couch, and Ian adjusted a throw blanket over the two of us. We stayed like that, him on one end, me on the other, but somewhere along the way, my head slipped onto his shoulder. I must have been tired, because I didn't even notice. I just remember the rhythm of the rain, and the way his breathing steadied beneath me. I remember feeling safe. And when I woke up, sometime later, his arm was around me. Not in a forced way. Not in a way that crossed any lines. Just, wrapped around me. Protective. Familiar. And I should have moved. I should have said something. Sat up. Created space. But I didn't. I stayed. Because at that moment, I didn't want to be anywhere else. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about missing Henry anymore. It was about something else. Something I wasn't ready to admit, not even to myself. The next morning, I couldn't look at him. Ian made breakfast like usual, eggs, toast, fruit on the side, but I just thanked him with a half smile and kept my eyes on my coffee cup. Something had shifted between us. And I hated how much I felt it in my chest. It wasn't that we'd done anything wrong. But I'd let something almost happen. And that almost was enough to ruin me. I started creating space. Going out more. Keeping busy. Pretending. I told Ian I was joining a grief support group on Thursday nights. I wasn't. I just needed a night where I didn't see his eyes across the dinner table, watching me like I was still something beautiful. I even called Xavier Fernandez, Henry's old friend, just to talk. He'd checked in once after the funeral and hadn't followed up, but I found myself hoping maybe some old familiar energy would reset whatever was happening in my head. Xavier was kind. He always had been. But it wasn't the same. He spoke about Henry like a history book. Not like someone who missed him with their whole body. Still, I entertained the idea of letting Xavier into the space I'd accidentally given Ian. It felt like penance. Like maybe if I invited someone else in, it would undo the way I'd started to feel. But it didn't. The guilt clung to me like wet fabric, tight, uncomfortable, unshakable. And then, there was Brooklyn. She came by one afternoon while Ian was out. We made small talk in the living room. It was awkward. Too quiet. Before she left, she handed me an envelope. I found this in Ian's room, she said, almost casually. You probably dropped it. I opened it after she left. It was a printed photo. A candid one Ian had taken during that stormy night. I hadn't even known he snapped it. I was asleep on his shoulder. His arm was around me. My hand, resting softly over his. The image was harmless. But to anyone else, it would never look that way. Even to me, it didn't. Brooklyn hadn't said anything else. She didn't have to. Later that day, Ian found me folding laundry and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't push. That night, I called Liberty. I needed someone who didn't see me as a mother. Or a widow. Or a mess. Just me. I told her everything. Well, almost everything. I didn't say I wanted him to touch me again. I didn't say I thought about it more than I should have. I just said I'd crossed a line I never meant to cross. Liberty went quiet on the other end of the call. Then she said something that stuck in my ribs. Was it really about Henry, or about you finally feeling seen again? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. A few days later, while straightening the bookshelves, I found a small envelope tucked behind the family albums. My name was written on the front. In Ian's handwriting. I hesitated. I knew I shouldn't open it. But I did. Inside was a short letter. You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know, that night meant something to me. I'm not confused. I'm not ashamed. I'm just here. And if you never bring it up again, I'll still be here. Because whatever that moment was, I think it helped both of us breathe again. There was no date. No signature. Just that. I folded it up and put it back exactly where I found it. And then I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking, my breath caught in my throat. Because I finally realized what I hadn't let myself admit before. This wasn't just comfort. It wasn't just grief. It was love. Or something dangerously close to it. And I didn't know what to do with that. What do you call love, when it's real, but wrong? Because I felt it. And I know he did too. I don't know what finally pushed me to say the words out loud. Maybe it was the guilt. Maybe it was Brooklyn's face in my doorway, too polite to accuse me, but already knowing. Or maybe it was the letter. I kept rereading that line, whatever that moment was. I think it helped both of us breathe again. It was beautiful. It was honest. But it wasn't right. One evening, after dinner, I asked Dean to sit down. No candles. No tea. Just me and him and this heaviness that had been building between us. He looked at me like he already knew what I was going to say. I took a breath, held it longer than I needed to, and finally said, "We need space." His eyes didn't move. Not even a blink. "I can't trust what this is becoming," I continued. "Not because you've done anything, but because I've let it become more than it should be." He didn't interrupt me. Didn't get defensive. He just looked tired. I hated that I was the one putting that look on his face. After a long silence, he nodded once. Then his voice broke as he said, "I know." I felt it in my chest when he said that. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt because I was pushing him away. He was hurt because he understood. That made it worse. I offered to help him find a place nearby, but he told me he already had something in mind. It was quick. Quiet. Clean. He packed a few bags and left the next morning. No long goodbye. No tears at the door. But when I closed it behind him, I slid to the floor and cried harder than I had in months. Not because I lost him, but because I had let him become something he never should have had to be. Brooklyn broke up with him the following week. I didn't ask for details. He didn't offer any. They were young. They could recover. But something about the way he walked when I saw him in passing, shoulders heavier, eyes a little duller, I knew it wasn't just a breakup. It was everything. All of it crashing at once. That's when I knew I needed help. Not from Ian. Not from Xavier. Not even from Liberty. From strangers. From people who understood grief in its raw, ugly, unromantic form. So I joined a group that met on Tuesday nights in the basement of an old church. It was led by a woman named Irene Bender, older, soft-spoken, but sharp. You could tell she'd seen things most people spend a lifetime avoiding. During my second session, she asked me what brought me there. I hesitated, then said, "I lost my husband." She nodded like she'd heard that 100 times. "And?" I looked down at my hands, then back up and said, "And then I found comfort in someone I shouldn't have." She didn't flinch. Just nodded again. "Did they hurt you?" "No," I said. "They made me feel alive again." And that might be worse. That was the first time I'd said it aloud without burying it in metaphor. I didn't name Ian. Didn't say anything specific. But the weight of it left my body like smoke. Something about being in that circle, surrounded by strangers who'd buried their own versions of Henry, it made me feel human again. Not perfect. But not monstrous either. A few nights later, I was walking through the hallway, turning off lights before bed. I passed by the photo wall, the one that had been untouched since the funeral. I stopped in front of Henry's favorite picture. The one from our trip to Montana. He had on that awful green flannel and the ugliest grin. It used to make me laugh. Now it just hurts. I stood there for a while, just looking at him. And without thinking, I whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to forget. I just wanted to feel." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't apologizing for loving Ian. I was apologizing for letting myself go numb after Henry died. And for the part of me that needed someone, to wake me up again. Time is funny. It doesn't really heal you, it just adds layers between the wound and the surface. 3 years passed. Ian moved into his own place, finished grad school, and started teaching. I saw him now and then, holidays, birthdays, those random check-ins when you pretend everything's totally normal. We were fine. At least on the outside. Then one spring afternoon, I found myself sitting in the back of a white tent, surrounded by sunflowers and soft music, watching Ian slip a gold ring onto Jasmine Brown's finger. She was sweet. Smart. Steady in a way I never had to be for him. They made sense together. Everyone clapped. I did too. But my hands felt heavy. At the reception, I floated through the motions, gifts, hugs, cake, small talk. I smiled at strangers. I laughed at inside jokes I wasn't part of. But underneath all of it, was this one thought. He's starting his life. And I've never told him the truth about ours. Near the end of the night, I slipped away from the crowd. I found him alone behind the tent, straightening his tie in a mirror leaned up against a tree. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. That same soft smile he's always had just for me. "Hey, Mom," he said. I walked up, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "There's something I need to say," I told him. "Before you go make a life." His smile faltered. "Just a little." He waited. "I've carried this for a long time," I said. "And I know we never crossed any lines." "Not really." But back then, I paused. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally did. Back then, I started to love you in a way I didn't know how to explain. Not as a mother. Not fully as a woman either. But in a way that scared me. His eyes didn't leave mine. He didn't flinch. "I never meant to put that on you," I continued. "And I'm not asking for anything now. I just didn't want to leave today without saying it out loud." There was a long pause. He nodded slowly. "I know," he said quietly. "I felt it too." And just like that, relief and heartbreak showed up together. He didn't say it like an accusation. He wasn't ashamed. He just knew. But maybe, he added, that moment saved us both. In its